Hello, and welcome to the ATPE podcast, brought to you by the Association of Texas Professional Educators and covering the hottest topics on Texas educators' minds today.
Hello, and welcome to the ATPE podcast. I'm your host, David George, and today we're diving into a crucial topic that impacts not just our classrooms, but our entire communities: the importance of voting in the upcoming general election. Whether you're a teacher, an administrator, a student, or a parent, your voice matters, and this upcoming election is not just about picking a new president. It's about making decisions that affect our education system, funding for our schools, teacher salaries, and essential programs. We're excited to be joined again by ATPE Governmental Relations Director, Monty Exter. Thank you for being here, Monty.
Thanks for having me.
There's so much to talk about on this subject. Let's begin with the important dates and the deadlines. When is Election Day, and what is the voter registration deadline?
Absolutely. So we've actually got several dates. Those are two of them. Let's start off with some information about mail-in ballots. Most of our members probably don't use a mail-in ballot, but a few do, and they probably have parents or no retired educators who might use them. So you can already be requesting your mail-in ballot now, assuming that you are already registered to vote. If you are either not registered to vote or you think you need to update your registration to vote, that particular deadline hits on October 7th. So your registration has to be postmarked by the 7th. The first day then of early voting is on October 21st, so just a couple of weeks after that. The last day to be able to request a ballot by mail is October 25th, although I would not wait until then, and I will make sure everybody knows that that is not the last day to have it postmarked by. That is the last day that they have to actually receive the request. So that means that depending upon where you're at, you need to back up at least a few days from there to be able to hit that deadline. Then we've got the last day of early voting. That's going to be on Friday, November 1st. That's 2 weeks after early voting starts. Then we've got Election Day on Tuesday, November 5th.
So speaking of early voting, what are the benefits to getting out there early?
Well, one of the major benefits is that you're usually going to have to wait for a lot less time. Election Day tends to be a little bit busy. And so polls tend to be a little bit longer lines, and you can usually avoid that during the early voting period. In addition to that, a lot of times in many parts of the state, many municipalities in particular, there will be more poll places open, or you have the availability to use more of them during the early voting period. Some municipalities will let you vote at any polling location inside of, your district anytime throughout the election, including Election Day, but others, that's true for early voting, but not necessarily true on day of election. So you just have more choices, fewer lines. Also, should there be any sort of issues, then you have time to potentially resolve them. Where that's not going to be nearly as true if you wait all the way till Election Day.
So I've heard a lot lately about the Texas purging its voter lists. How can educators check their voting status and be sure that they're still registered?
So it's actually really easy. And in fact, it's so easy that we really recommend that people do this for every election. All you have to do is go to Vote Texas. That's all the way spelled out, VOTETEXAS, no spaces, .gov. So votetexas.gov. And then it's just a few simple steps. You put in a little bit of your information, and it will tell you whether or not you are registered to vote. And for many people, more importantly, where you're registered to vote. Most educators are registered, not all, and we encourage those who aren't to get registered. Most are registered, but if you've moved, then you need to update your registration. And updating from a deadline standpoint is the same as just getting registered to start with. So you want to make sure that you are registered at your location that your registration is still good and active. And if not, you need to resolve that before October 7th.
Do you think that this is going to have any impact on voter turnout for the election?
I mean, so I think that the news stories certainly about, purging the voter registration lists, things of that nature, are intended, right, to have a political punch and some impact. So unfortunately, they are probably intended to discourage folks from voting or participating just by adding additional negativity. They also, mistakenly call into question the integrity of our voter rolls by making it sound like we had lots of people on the voter rolls, right, that weren't supposed to be there. The reality is that most of the people that get purged from the voter rolls are either people who have simply passed away between the last time they checked and now. It's a big state. People pass away. Or people have moved and there has been some indication that's hit the system that, lets folks know who are managing that list that they no longer live at that address. The property records have changed, something along those particular lines. And so they may get purged off. Doesn't mean that they weren't a rightful voter to start with. It simply means that they need to re-register.
Talk to us about the biggest challenges facing Texas educators right now, and how can voting help address these issues?
Well, there's certainly a lot facing Texas educators and Texas education right now, and voting helps because while Texas educators themselves help to shape the future of Texas, it is our elected officials, primarily the Texas Legislature, who helps to shape the present and future of the Texas education system. And the way that they do that is by passing policies and a state budget that impact almost every part of the system. So let's take teacher pay just as one example. Your district likely spends somewhere around 80% of their current budget on payroll. So necessarily have a lot of discretionary dollars out there to be able to say, given across the board pay raise to educators. It's not like they have some giant reserve of money sitting behind that they're not using, or that they're spending huge amounts of money in areas that can easily be redistributed towards payroll because it's already such a large part of the budget. They really are dependent upon funding increases to make that happen. It is also the case that your local elected board has very limited ability to locally increase their own revenue in terms of funding. They can do a TRE, they can increase the local tax rate, but by and large, that's very limited. Many of them are already capped out, actually, and can't even increase it. Those that can increase it, it's a very limited increase, and particularly that's true if you happen to live in a district where there's recapture, and any increase, the vast majority of which is just going to go back to the state anyway. So really, the body that has the ability to really dramatically impact those resources is the Texas Legislature, who decides how the funding formulas work and how much money they're putting into public education. They can also decide if they want to specifically spend some of that money directly on across-the-board teacher pay raises or some other form of teacher pay raise. But whether it's just giving more money to districts or specifically designating money for a teacher pay raise, it really is up to them for that to happen. And it's even gotten to the point, right, where we're not just talking about raises. At this point, we're also talking about not losing things like stipends. Many districts across the state are at this point having to operate under deficit budgets going into next year, meaning that they're drawing down as much as they can off of their fund balance just to get by on current programs. And many of them are trying to decide, do I, in order to make ends meet, I guess, per se, have to cut some positions, or do we try to eliminate stipends across the board for many positions just in order to have enough money to operate the programs, largely because inflation has increased the cost of everything, and districts haven't gotten any additional revenue. Now it'll be going on 5 years. So all of that is determined by elected officials. So optimally, right, you get out and you vote, and the official that most naturally aligns to your priorities wins. But even in the instance where that isn't the case, just getting out and voting in large numbers reinforce the desire for all elected officials to do a better job in your policy area, because they understand that you're going to the polls and you're paying attention.
Well, what changes do you hope to see in education policy from the Texas legislature as a result of this election?
Well, hopefully, what we will see is that our state leaders in particular, and some of the Texas legislators as well, will stop focusing intently or exclusively in some cases on privatizing the system, utilizing current revenue streams coming into the state, because nobody's suggesting increasing any revenue streams coming into the state, and directing those towards private schools as opposed to public schools, setting up a real funding problem for us in the future. Hopefully they'll turn away from that focus, and they will again focus on where the vast majority of Texas students are, the public education system, and the huge number of folks that are serving those students in the public education system are public educators, and providing them with the resources they need to actually get the job done in an optimal fashion. Texas educators need a pay raise. In addition to that, we also need more resources to be able to handle populations like our bilingual or ELL population. We definitely need more resources to be able to do a better job with our special education population. Right now, districts spend about $2 billion a year more than the state gives them to try to provide services for that population. The same can be true with our low socioeconomic students. We need more resources to be able to close the education gap between those students and their wealthier peers. So really, the hope is that they will prioritize the things that public education needs, and stop emphasizing other systems that aren't going to help public education students. In addition to that, they will hopefully stop some of the rhetoric that has demonized public education and public educators while they've been in pursuit of transitioning money out of the public education system and into a private education system, right? All the conversations about inappropriate library books, or inappropriate activities from educators, or things like grooming or wokeness, things that by and large are, fringe at best within our public education system, but are being used as dog whistles to try to pass vouchers. The large turnout in voting amongst parents, amongst educators, in a pro-public education fashion will very quickly make all of that stop.
So like you just said, a strong voter turnout in this election could shape the future of education in Texas. And we're always preaching that the voter turnout is the key to getting legislators to listen and to take education issues seriously. What do you have to back that up?
So history is kind of what we have to back that up, right? So it wasn't so many sessions ago that we had a similar scenario to what we have now. Vouchers were in fact being pushed in that session, although the most sort of odious bill that was catching headlines was the bathroom bill. Back in 2017, it was all bathroom bill all the time. And also you saw the legislature trying to pass vouchers at the same time. Then we came through the 2018 election cycle, where we had such strong voter turnout that despite the fact that a few people at the top of the ticket retained their seats, those margins were exceedingly tight, tighter than they felt comfortable with to still be going forward with that rhetoric. So you went from a 2017 session that was terrible for public education into the 2019 session where there was no voucher filed at all. And we passed House Bill 3, which, while not perfect, was at that point in time the largest infusion of one-time money and rolling forward money in public education that we had ever seen. And that was all due to the turnout in one election that happened between those two sessions.
How can educators and advocates identify candidates who prioritize education in their platforms?
Sure. So a couple of things. I think that the easiest way, and the way that we've spent a lot of time with, right, is teach the vote. Every single legislator or legislative candidate in the House, every single candidate in the Senate has a teach the vote profile. It's pretty easy. You can go in and put in your address. It'll tell you where your SBOE district and your Senate district and your state legislative district or House district is, who's running there. You can definitely see some of those things. Kind of on a broad sense too, like you mentioned in terms of platform, you can always take a look, which you can also do this on Teach the Vote. We definitely publish this, and we'll probably be putting out a lot of these types of posts in the next few weeks about the party platforms, just on a sort of general basis, I suppose, and determine, from at least the sort of state level, what does each one say about public education? Because they're very different. Now, I will say, you got to take that one with a grain of salt. Really not any politician 100% follows the platform on either side of the aisle of their party. But it's a good baseline spot to start. Then again, look to teach the vote. You can also, look to try to visit a candidate forum. They're certainly having them right now. You can go, if you're feeling, I guess really feisty about it, go and ask a question specifically of the candidate to make sure that they address something on public education. You can also call into the district office, particularly if they're an incumbent, and ask them some specific questions. Or if you notice that they haven't filled out the survey on Teach the Vote, request that they do. They've all received the survey, but we are happy to send them the link again. On the flip side of that, one area where I would probably be more cautious is to base, or at least to largely base, your opinions on candidates on what you're receiving in your mailbox. And I say that even being an organization that sends some things out to people in their mailboxes. But, what you can expect is that largely those things are going to be biased, particularly if they're coming from the candidate themselves, right? They're going to be pretty biased about the way that they speak about themselves. Sadly, they are not always going to be, I won't say that they're not truthful, but they're going to certainly shape the truth in a way that best fits them. And there are some orgs that actually did send out flyers during the primary season that just flat out weren't truthful. So you have to be careful about that kind of thing. And a lot of those actually were on the voucher issue. The flyers weren't on the voucher issue, but the orgs were in place because of the voucher issue. And so, that's maybe not the place to look. So hopefully that helps folks out in terms of figuring out who to vote for.
Are there any districts or races that we should be focusing on? Obviously, our local races are going to be very important to us, but statewide, is there anything that ATPE is focused on?
Sure. I mean, we definitely take a look at where I guess you would call them hot races are, the more competitive, I guess, races are, in terms of some of our efforts. We certainly don't have the kind of money to get involved in every race in the state at the state level. But I will say, if you're in a highly competitive race based on the quantity of stuff that's hitting your mailbox with regard to that particular district, right? If you're in a competitive legislative race, then you're getting a lot of stuff in your mailbox about your House members, or if it's in a Senate district, about those senators. And so you kind of know whether or not you're in a competitive race there. But I will say it's important for all educators really to come out and vote, because there is some race on your ballot likely that is going to be competitive. And also, it's important just, again, to come out because numbers matter. We and other entities can certainly identify whether or not teachers turned up to vote. We can't identify who anybody voted for, right? But we know whether or not you turned out to vote. That's public information. And so that's the kind of thing that people are looking at too. So even if you don't feel like you're in a race, maybe your House race is not competitive. Maybe there's not even a challenger. Maybe you feel like there's not a gubernatorial or a light gov race on the ballot because they alternate with the presidential race. I think it's important for everybody in America, right, to vote in the presidential race, because I feel like it's part of our democratic duty to get out there. That's kind of one of the founding points of the country, right, is that we have the ability to pick our leaders. But maybe you don't feel that race is competitive, and maybe it's not in this particular state. It's still important to go vote there. Again, it's also about flexing that muscle every time, because if you get out and vote every time, then it becomes a habit. And getting out and voting this time will make it easier to get out and vote next time. And the next time you're going to get out and vote, it's going to be a primary again, where it may be very important and it may be very competitive. So really, we just encourage you to vote every time. And again, if you want to know whether or not you're in a district that has a competitive race, the quantity of things in your mailbox will surely tell you.
As always, thank you for joining us, Monty. If you have any questions or feedback, you can send those to comm@atpe.org. That's COMM@atpe.org. And we encourage you to subscribe to the podcast as well as leave us a review. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please get out and vote, and we'll see you next time on the ATPE podcast.
Thanks for listening to the ATPE podcast. For more information about becoming part of Texas's largest community of educators, please visit atpe.org.